Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Inside Today's Boardrooms, presented by Diligent Institute, your source for the latest and greatest in corporate governance, all in 10 minutes. I'm Lisa Edwards, Executive Chair of Diligent Institute and host of the show. Today, I'm joined by Ed Hauder, Head of Research and Content and Principal at Meridian Compensation Partners. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. We have a great topic today. We're talking about how to view compensation through the lens of an activist. And, we've been researching compensation plans quite a bit here at Diligent as we're putting together a new director certification program on human capital, compensation, and culture. So this one's super near and dear to my heart right now. Let's start off by having you walk through some of the reasons why an activist might come knocking over a compensation plan.
Well, it probably won't be the sole issue that they come knocking on your door about. That was very clear. If you look at, the latest shareholder activism annual review 2024 that Diligent put out, many of your experts there pointed out, look, if you're talking about compensation, it won't be the sole issue. That said, when you look at the demand groups, the remuneration or compensation group was the largest increase, both globally and in the US. So there's a high probability that if you have an activist shareholder and they're interested in your company, when they come knocking, they may bring a compensation issue. And so it's not likely to be on its own. And so it's important to understand what it is they're looking for. When you think about what is it that the activist shareholders don't like, they're looking for things that are sort of out of sync with, market practice, peer practice. Also, they're looking to see, sort of what's the ratio of the CEO's pay to the next, named executive officers. So if that shows a really high ratio, that could make you susceptible to an attack there. The other thing that they're trying to look for is if you're using something like an aspirational peer group. So if you've used that, they're going to probably jump all over it. And so one of the things I think people need to be aware of is they're trying to score points. They're trying to create a wedge that they can gain some traction with shareholders on an issue. Because if they can engage shareholders and get their support on that issue, it makes it easier for them to, go with whatever else they're trying to do, which normally is going to be trying to get a board seat.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me. So looking at CEO ratio, looking at, is the peer group, realistic? Is it a true peer group? If you're a compensation committee member and you say, I want to put myself in the activist shoes, I want to make sure this comp plan sort of holds water before an activist comes in, what are some of those things that a board or a compensation committee can look at and say, what can we do proactively?
Proactively, I think committees should consider, doing an audit and have a third party take a look to see, hey, do we have any weaknesses in our comp program? Do we have things like aspirational peers? And the way compensation committees typically look at compensation itself, you're looking at it sort of from a target perspective. You're setting the opportunity. But the way the activist shareholders look at things, they're looking at it sort of after the fact. And so they look more at the realized pay. So one of the things I think companies should be doing is doing a look at their realized pay versus both their financial performance and their stock price performance, because that's what the activist shareholders will be doing. And if there's some type of disconnect, I think you need to make sure that you're explaining why that disconnect exists and how your program is being designed, to take that into account going forward.
So when you look at that, you look at TSR versus, say, CEO pay, and you say, gee, one went up 50%. And the other, went up 8%, and it's the wrong way. It's the comp went up 50% and the TSR went up 8%. Some of that is for comp plans that were set, 3 years prior. So how do you think about, this year, either here's the messaging that we want to give to the market around we understand, or how to set things so that balance comes more into a true balance.
Yeah, well, I don't think you really should rely on a single year of pay. I personally think you need to look at a 3 or 5 year period and do the same thing with TSR and also the financial performance and look at the trend. And so, the sort of the saying is the trend is your friend. Well, that's really the case here, because if the trend shows pay is generally aligned with the trend of performance, then you should be able to explain this to everyone. If, however, you've got a divergence, pay is going up. This is what is going to be the typical issue where activists will strike. Your pay has gone up and your performance has fallen off. Well, it could be that you're at an inflection point in your business and you've changed things. You're going after your own strategic objectives. The pay reflects that. Maybe you're in a turnaround situation and you had to pay top dollar to get a turnaround specialist in the door. Then make sure your shareholders understand that, because that's one way that it explains what's going on. And until his programs or her programs, can be implemented, it's not likely that the performance is going to match the pay.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think so your message is communicate, say what you're doing and why you're doing it, and let the market know we expect this CEO to grow into this, or we expect the TSR to catch up to, what we needed to do to get the right person in the seat.
Oftentimes, when you look at it, there's a delay between the market recognizing what the company has done and company performance and stock price performance. So to the extent that you set out a strategic objective and you're seeing results and you're happy to be paying that out, I think it behooves you to go make sure that you're explaining to your shareholders why this is good for both the company and the shareholders going forward.
Got it. So maybe let's fast forward and say, okay, there's an activist investor. They have expressed concern with this executive compensation plan. How do you respond to that? Do you just say, fine, we'll do it? Do you counter it? What's the strategy there typically?
Typically, the strategy is to analyze what they're saying in the context of your objectives and strategies for the compensation plan as an incentive. To the extent that what criticisms they're pulling up are counter to what you're trying to achieve, you need to point that out. The first step also is, are you going to do one-on-one engagement, or are you simply going to respond to this through a press release or through sort of proxy disclosure?
Right. And there's a lot of specialists who can help out with the overall activism strategy, but I imagine there's also a subset of just sort of good due diligence and homework to be done on the compensation side, should that come up in those conversations.
Right. I believe being forewarned is being forearmed, and it'll allow you to take care of the issues sooner rather than later.
Got it. Well, any best and final thoughts on the notion of activism and compensation, trends that we should look at, where you think it's going, that kind of thing. What are you seeing there?
I think the big takeaway here is it's not going away. Activist shareholders are here to stay. With Universal Proxy Card, their job is a little bit easier to at least try to grab one seat. And sometimes that's all they want. They want a seat at the table so that their views are known. Other times they want a more aggressive approach. But I think recognizing that and realizing that some of the things they're pushing for when it comes to remuneration are, they want like a stock retention or holding period, or they want, payments to be, severance payments to be submitted to shareholder vote. So these, while they got a lot of those types of proposals, the support for them actually dropped. And so I think people need to understand the full context of the compensation issues being put forward by activist shareholders to better understand how do we need to respond and how do we need to think about our pay programs in that larger context.
That's great. So we'll end it there. That was fantastic. And thank you, Ed, for walking us through all of that. You can view Meridian's full range of content on this topic on their website under the Insights section. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next week for yet another episode of Inside Today's Boardrooms.